Hi everyone, my name is Roger Hall. I'm the Technology Training Manager for Global. You may have heard some of the radio networks that we run. They include, but are not limited to, Capital, Capital Extra, Radio X, Heart, Smooth, Classic FM, Gold, and LBC. I've been with Global just over 13 years now, and I suspect, like many of the people on this call, we have been put in a situation exactly the same as you, where we're not able to do a lot of our regular broadcasting from our regular broadcast centres in Leicester Square and around the country. So we've been doing an awful lot of broadcasting from home and helping a lot of our presenters to do that. So we've got two other experts in this particular field to join us on the call today. First of all, I'm going to introduce a colleague of mine. He works alongside me in the broadcast engineering team at Global. It's Stephen Clarke. Hi, Steve.
Hiya, how you doing? Just going to carry on. So I've been at Global for nearly 3 years. I started up in Leeds, up in our broadcast centre up there. And now I'm in Leicester Square, looking after, I think we've got 47 studios now, and somewhere close to 20 different radio services coming out of that building, plus then all of our regional networks on top of that. So I'm mainly going to talk about kind of what we've been doing at Global in commercial radio and how we've been keeping our services on air. And then Matthew, who's with us as well. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Matthew, and essentially what I have done, I've been head of computing at URY up in York, and well, I'm here to talk about what we did back in, well, I guess 4 months ago it started now. It's been a long time, but yeah, what we did to get URY to continue going into our summer term, and probably give you some information on what you can do to get your station up and running, or help you along with creating better stuff while we're all kind of stuck here at home.
Brill. Thank you, Matthew. So I can see there's lots of people joining us in the chat, which is great. So as Rosie said at the top, please, if you've got any questions at all, anything that you want to know, drop them into the Q&A section, because essentially that's what we're here to do, not necessarily to talk about us and all the things that we've been doing, but we want it to be a bit more practical than that, and actually give you guys some ideas, some encouragement about how you can get your stations broadcasting as best as you can come the other side of the summer. So let's go back to Steve. And first of all, I just want to think about how things went from a big commercial radio operator and all of the things that we had to do in order to keep all of our radio services running, just in terms of as I was saying, ideas, inspiration, things that maybe we can take from that and apply to our student stations or the community stations that we're broadcasting from. Steve, so do you want to tell us the story of how things look from a global perspective?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things to bear in mind as I talk about what we've done at Global is that as a national commercial radio company, we are able to keep, we're key workers, we're able to keep going to the office, we're able to have people in the office at all times to kind of keep us on there from there. So a lot of our focus was around bringing presenters' voices into the studios, so then the producers that were in the studios could get them on air. It was less about how we make, a radio broadcast happen from somewhere that it's not supposed to. It was more about how we just get our presenters in. So a lot of our solutions were actually quite simple, but the thing for us was the scale of application rather than the actual complexity of the solutions themselves. So we sort of, as you said, Matthew, about four and a bit months ago now, we sort of saw this thing coming that was potentially going to cause us to have some issues. And we actually managed to start prepping about two weeks before the lockdown happened. So our programming teams sort of planned a response for each brand, how they were going to present, what they were going to do, whether they were going to stay in the studio, which presenters would be where, and sort of gave us an idea of what they wanted to do. And then from that, we were able to plan what kit we had and what kit we needed. And it turned out we didn't have anywhere near enough kit. So that's when we started ordering loads and loads of USB mics. Apologies if you couldn't buy any. That was probably our fault. We basically cleared out the stock of a specific type of USB mic from about 3 or 4 different suppliers in the UK over about a month. Just because every time we'd thought, that'll be plenty, we'll order that many, and then we'd clear them out and then realize that that's not enough. So then we'd find a different supplier that had some more. We also ordered, some different things. So like USB interfaces, some like IP codecs. So a box that sort of sits on the internet, and you can plug like normal mics and headphones into it. It's a little bit more reliable than some of the other systems we had in place. And to go with those, we got 4G routers, which had like multiple 4G SIM cards in, so that if the network connection drops out, it's going out over different networks. So it just kind of makes it a bit more reliable. And we just built a plan from there of what we had, who was going to get what, and what they were going to do. And we made sure that we had the connectivity in Leicester Square to get all of these different sources in. So most of our presenters had a USB mic. We used the Audio-Technica 80-20-20 USB, I think it is, or the 40-40. I can't remember which way around the numbers go. 2020, thanks, Roger. So we use that. We use not the I version. We use the one that has the headphone jack built into the mic, but we do have a few I's as well, just because of the USB plus. Thanks, Roger. Your hand signals are helping. So that's what we used. They are quite good budget mics. And we had most of our presenters using those into IPTCL, which is a browser-based IP codec. So they just open a web page at their end, talk into it, and it falls out of wherever it's connected to. So we built a load of PCs up in our racks room, which had their audio inputs and outputs connected into our audio system. So then that could go into our studios. So that was like the main thing for us. And then it didn't matter too much if a presenter's home internet wasn't so good, because they could pre-record a link, or if we needed to, we could send out a box to them that had multiple 4G connections, so we could bolster their internet connection there. For some of our services though, such as LBC, the presenters are talking for quite a long time without breaks and without the opportunity to sort of record something and re-record it if it doesn't quite work, or if the connection drops out or whatever. So we had to make their connections a bit more reliable. So some of our presenters from the many years of doing radio and talk radio, they've got ISDN connections already at their house. So anyone that doesn't know, ISDN is a slightly more old school format of essentially a telephone line, but it's a higher quality digital telephone line that BT can install. They're getting more and more expensive to install because BT want to get rid of them, but they proved very useful during this time for us. Whilst everyone was sat at home increasing their internet usage, we were able to go on this slightly separate subsystem and use that to keep our LBC presenters on air. And then for the presenters on LBC that didn't have ISDN, and we couldn't get an ISDN2, then we could give them one of these 4G boxes, and we gave them an IP audio codec rather than just a laptop and a browser, just so, because they handle better if connections aren't quite as good, or if they vary slightly, the codec deals with that and changes its bit rate and latency and stuff to sort of cope with any internet problems. So that was the main thing we did for audio. Sorry, I've made some notes and I'm just scanning through them to make sure I've not missed anything there. No, that's pretty much it. So through all that, presenters are able to sit at home. They've got their mic going into an ISDN box, an IP audio codec, or into a laptop, which is then coming back into Leicester Square. And then there's a producer sort of sat in the studio, putting the fader up, and they're hearing, like, if they've got callers or if they've got music, they're hearing that back down the line to them. There were a few cases where, for various reasons, that presenter stayed in the studio, and it was actually the producers that went home. So in that case, we, rather than focusing on the audio, we needed to give them the ability to control various systems remotely. So the best thing for this was just a laptop with remote access to one of the studio PCs, and then they could kind of carry on doing everything they needed. And for their communication with the presenter, they simply just had FaceTime. So a lot of our studios have video walls around the edge of the studio, and FaceTime comes up so on the wall. So they're kind of just opposite the presenter, and it's just like they're sat opposite each other in the room, but obviously on FaceTime instead of in the room. And that kind of brings us to what we did video wise. So obviously our main focus is our radio output, and that was what all our initial efforts went into. But video is becoming more and more a part of what we do. We do put a lot of content out onto our social media platforms, and we do record a lot of things in both audio, like radio quality audio and video, so that we can either use that content later on the radio or post it out again on social media after it's been shared and use it for different things. So our video infrastructure was already quite good. We already had FaceTime available for every studio, or pretty much every studio. We've got Skype available in places. We've got vision mixers. Like, we've got quite a good video infrastructure. But one of the things we were lacking was the ability to record things like FaceTime calls and Zoom calls outside of a studio environment. So all of the codecs for doing that were linked to studios, which meant you kind of had to be in a studio to do it. So when you've got, I know Hart have done some things where they've had someone like Mark Wright has been at home on a Zoom call with Ollie Mers doing some sort of challenge. So all of the people involved in that are actually not in the building. They're all sat at home. So it seems kind of stupid to have to use a radio studio to record that content and to make that work. So provided like machines and systems so they can have that call separate from a radio studio, but still have someone in Leicester Square that's recording it into our vision mixing system, putting in the graphics and all that sort of thing. And, you know, in some cases doing it live onto Facebook or Twitter or wherever, or onto the global player. And just changing our infrastructure slightly to make it work for the situation. They also had a lot of, because obviously you don't want to have too many people together in one room, and our video team sit quite close together in their office. There's a lot of them in not a lot of space, all with quite powerful iMacs for editing, and the vision control room itself has got like 4 workstations for vision mixing, which are again quite close together. So they wanted the ability to edit from home, but they didn't necessarily all have an iMac they could take home. So we needed to give them the ability to be able to edit remotely. So some of those iMacs are still, a few have taken them home where it's someone that's like a full-time editor, and it sort of makes sense for them to have their iMac at home. But others are sharing iMacs in Leicester Square, and what they'll do is they'll sit at home on their MacBook, they'll remote into the iMac at work, and then, you know, if their MacBook decides it's not powerful enough to do the thing they need to do, or it's not got good enough internet or connection or whatever, the iMac that's in Leicester Square is just going to carry on doing the thing, and wait for, you know, they can wait for their internet to recover, for their remote session to recover. And similarly, they also wanted to be able to do basic vision mixing from home as well. So fortunately, we've got a couple of vision mixers that you can remote access, and it was something that we've known for a while was a feature that we could implement, and this kind of just gave us the push to roll out a few new features that we haven't looked at before, and find out how they work and make use of those. So one of our vision mixers can do NDI video, which is essentially streaming its video sources live. So we can, you know, see the multi-view of the vision mixer, and you can see all the sources coming in, and you can see what you're doing with it, and then you can have a web page open where you're controlling what the vision mix output is. And actually means you can sit at home on your sofa in your pants if you want, and, you know, vision mix a live interview that's going out onto Facebook, potentially to millions of people, which is kind of crazy and kind of weird. I think the most interesting thing for us was change on how we worked as a team. So we, in Leicester Square alone, we normally have up to 11 engineers on any one day. We cover that building 365 days a year, including Christmas Day. Every bank holiday, every weekend, we've got someone in at least for a few hours, normally for at least a full 9 to 5 type shift, and then weekdays longer than that as well. And so with all of this, we ended up going down to 2 engineers in the building on any given day. And some days, particularly weekends, we've dropped down to no one in the building, and everyone else is sort of working remotely. So we still have that full, we've still got the same full support hours, but all of our, or the majority of our team are actually working from home. We've got most of our systems online now, so we can remote into machines, or we can get into back end of systems via web pages. So we can actually do most of the support from home. We've got like a group phone number that people can ring in the building to get through to the engineering team, and we've now got the ability to pick that up from home as well. So it just comes through our internet connection. So it was just that change of working from being used to having 11 people in for a long time to potentially no one, but mostly just 2 people, which has been a big shift both for us as a team to try and communicate and make sure we all know what's going on if there's an issue that we kind of need to be aware of, but also with the people we support, letting them know that actually speaking to someone at home, they can generally fix the problem that you've got, even if you're used to someone coming up to the studio and you prefer that support of someone next to you. Generally most of the stuff we can do from home, and when we can't, we can then pass it over to someone that's in the building, but they might be busy dealing with other things. So our users sort of needed to get used to the fact they might not be quite as high priority as they thought they were. But I think generally that's worked quite well. Yeah, I think that's kind of it.
Cool, thank you, Stephen. From a slightly different angle then, because obviously at Global we were fortunate enough to have key worker status, so we could still get producers into the buildings. We had some pretty good playout systems, so we use Genesis and Zeta as playout for all of our radio stations, and Zeta comes with a built-in product called Zeta to Go, which enables people to insert pre-recorded voice links just from home using a web browser anyways.
This was the bit that I was thinking earlier. I've missed something.
Don't worry, Steve, I got you back. It's teamwork. So we used a system called Zeta to Go. So essentially we could just give a bunch of the presenters that worked on our stations that use Zeta, like Heart 70s and Heart 90s and Heart 80s and Gold. Here's a USB mic. Here's a MacBook to take with you, or plug it into your computer at home, and away you go. And that worked really, really effectively for those stations. Unfortunately, that isn't a luxury that I know a lot of student radio stations have. And the big challenge isn't necessarily really, I've got a microphone and I can record stuff. It's actually how you can plug it into either a studio or a transmitter when you're not in the building and get yourself on air. Now, some student stations I know have come up with their own solutions, but one station that's done it pretty successfully is University Radio York, which is why we've asked Matthew to join us on the call today. So Matthew, do you want to give us kind of the story and the background of the challenge that URY had and how you solved that particular issue to get yourselves back on air remotely?
Sure. So I mean, URY has a very given, it's probably half to do with the fact that we are the oldest. We are the oldest legal station, not legal station. I'll give up trying to say that all the words of that in the correct order. Nobody ever gets it right. But essentially, having such a history means that there have been a lot of things where URY have gone, we could build this ourselves because we don't want to pay for a commercial service when someone thinks it's a cool task to build, a project to build. So that definitely caused us a kind of a problem in that we use an in-house playout system with our own custom routing, processing and streaming stuff, which essentially means that we couldn't just go off the shelf, hi, can we have a product please, and just use that from home. So we were kind of half limited to building it ourselves. So about 3 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago it is now, we, just after the end of last term, we went, this is probably going to become a problem. How are we going to deal with at least being able to have some people at home and some people in the studio? As it turns out, everyone was forced to be at home. And so we effectively then had to build our entire station output to be coming from home. So with all that, we then we started with a very bare bones project that had kind of been working on, where we have our own like web-based system for planning your show beforehand. So putting your music in, your jingles, beds, any pre-recorded stuff. But that was essentially just a planner. It was called Show Planner. You put your items in. You can listen to them yourself, so you know when it starts. You can set intro points and that kind of thing. But that tool had absolutely no ability to do anything useful regarding actually broadcasting with it. And that's essentially what we ended up doing. We ended up expanding that into a full-on tool that does all of that as much as we could. Turns out that web browsers have the ultimate feature creep in that they literally do almost anything these days. And so with a bit of JavaScript, TypeScript, and Python stuff, we were able to build what we call Web Studio, which is as much of the studio processing and everything in a single web page. You don't need it to install, and hopefully runs on the majority of laptops that we know that people will have with the mics. In some cases, people were just able to use the mics on their like earpod kind of things. And in a lot of cases, when it's not being mangled by stuff like Zoom, they actually sound pretty decent. So yeah, our web studio tool that we had to build within the 4 weeks before coming back on air for summer term, we built in having a microphone, having the compression come in, and our 3 audio playback channels that kind of match what our system uses back at uni in our studios. And then it streams it using WebRTC, lots of names you may or may not have heard of. Essentially, what we were doing is building a studio in a web page with all the audio equipment you would need in the studio, and then having what is effectively a high quality one-way Zoom call, but using the underlying technology and not using Zoom itself. I'm not going to say that it was the prettiest code, having 4 weeks to essentially redo everything we do, everything we normally do from scratch. The code was not pretty, but we were very much time crunched in that it got all the way to the first day of term broadcast. And although we did broadcast, it was in low quality mono because we couldn't figure out the exact random thing we had to do in one random file somewhere to convince the web browser to go, I'm supposed to be sending you something that sounds good. So that was very much an overnight on the first day of term going, that's what I did. And it was fixed in production and then worked backwards to be actually implemented properly. But after the first week, we were finally happy that after, because not only did we have to have contribution from everyone's different houses, but we had to, the aim was that you shouldn't be able to tell that they are from home, apart from the fact that it's obvious that, people are broadcasting from their houses. So that involves knowing how we do the slick transitions between shows back to back. And so we essentially had to, what we normally do at UOI is we use the news. So we get IRN news via Sky, and that comes in with a satellite dish. And so we had to figure out in our software routing how to put the news on automatically with the jingle that splits the shows up, so that, and then cue in each side so that they know when they're ending or starting. And that was one of the main things I was dealing with, all the automation on that. That was quite fun. But that, although, you know, we eventually, after the first week, we were happy that we could have some sleep and let presenters get on with their shows as they want. We obviously had to change as a team, because like you're always lucky enough to have a fairly good sized computing and engineering team, and when your campus effectively is under lockdown and we're not supposed to be allowed into the studios, engineering team had to find something else to do, because the majority of station output, apart from them turning the transmission key on at the beginning and end of term, engineering had to find something to do. So what I loved about what we managed to achieve was computing were building the tool, but also working with engineering so that engineering could provide extra support and, you know, training materials and stuff like that. And it was very nice to be, you know, still working as a team through the difficult period. But I guess the next thing we were trying to get done, and we knew that this was not going to be done by week one, was getting multi-person shows. Because currently our solution is that you broadcast your entire studio output from the one computer at home. And we were like, okay, well, we need to get remote contribution, because UOI has, as I'm sure many other student stations do, have multiple people presenting regular shows. So although we never quite got to that, there is a main reason why we didn't end up pursuing that in the way that you, as to add two-way communication, was that people, including engineering team, were able to figure out how to do this without adding extra load. And so in the next little bit, I'm going to explain essentially how we, what kind of content we were able to produce, and therefore how you were able to produce it, maybe, and give you some tips with that. So it's amazing these days what you can do for free with free tools and a bit of ingenuity. Obviously, the easiest kind of one to do would be podcasts. I'm sure lots of people will be doing podcasts in this in the time. And you can do that. We've tried out quite a few different ways of doing this. Either you can, of course, do, you can have everyone record their local microphone, and then you can edit it into a good sounding podcast at the end, and record it as live with like a, you know, a Skype call or something like that, so that everyone can actually hear each other while you're recording it. And that costs no money, and you can get, you know, you get all your sound effects and everything, and you can make those sound pretty slick and publish them. You can also, which is quite fun, is you can do, you can pre-record entire shows or the links for them like this. So you can obviously have your regular music, and then you can slide in your pre-recorded links, as I'm sure as Global and Steve were saying that you indeed do that in industry. And we found that it was quite useful to do that for our station as well, in that you can, given that you're still recording at home with the same equipment and everything, you can make transitions between talking live and doing pre-records and have that sound pretty slick if you give it a bit of practice. Practice is quite a good one. So the people who practiced beforehand definitely got more out of their first couple shows than some of the people who just came on and went, it's clicking one button, let's start a show. Preparation and trying things out beforehand is definitely recommended. So that comes on to what you can do about getting shows that contain people, more than one person, and have those shows go out live without. And I know that a lot of our students are obviously on low budget, and I can't afford to buy things for our students, sadly. But apart from, we bought a clean feed license, a couple other things, but it's amazing now with software tools like I'm going to mention Voicemeeter. I think the Banana one, they have silly names and they increase in number of features that they have. Banana, I believe, is the one we used on Windows, or you can use Butt, which is broadcast using this tool. We've used that a lot in our regular outside broadcasts. And there's also Ladiocast on Mac. And what these tools are quite good at doing is allowing you to have a virtual mixer for free that allows you to route different applications. And that's into your live stream, as well as the browser source with your music and everything else as your show goes live. And then these tools then send Icecast streams back to our main server. But they also do Shoutcast and all the other formats that you're most likely, if you've ever done outside broadcasts as a student station, you've probably used either Shoutcast or Icecast as part of that, and they support that built in for free. But the cool thing is that they are a mixer. You can use them to route different audio sources, so you can hear your presenters, you can put them on air, and they can hear the music that you're playing in your browser without all the feedback trying to get that to work. So that's that saves you a lot of time and a lot of money, not having to have a physical mixer to mix in your voice and the volumes of other people via tools like CleanFeed. So if you haven't used CleanFeed before, it's pretty cool. Even the free version, it doesn't have some of the multi-tracking or changing individual people's volumes, but you can avoid that by just having multiple calls with one person in each call, and then adjust the volume in something like Voicemeeter. And CleanFeed is effectively like an audio call, but with a lot higher quality. So if you've got a good mic and you have good mic technique at the end of a CleanFeed call, it's unless your internet is not as fast as it could be, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference, at least as an end listener. And so we've had a lot of multi-person shows done like that, where it sounds studio quality on each end on what is effectively a high quality phone line like ISDN, but we didn't have to pay for it. But one thing that we realized quite early on when we were doing all this is that if you can only hear the people you're presenting with, you lose the entire sight of like people. If you've got more than 2 people or so in a call, you can't see if someone wants to say anything, and you eventually either nobody says anything or everyone tries to speak at the same time over the top of each other. And so we found that if not using CleanFeed, you might want to, well, you can use CleanFeed, but you can also use it in conjunction with a Zoom or Skype call, so you can see the people and you can put your hand up, and then the main presenter knows how to cue people to get a better show out of the other end. So I guess the last thing, there's a couple more things I want to talk about. Firstly, I know that a lot of people in certain universities, they have trouble with, they're going to have trouble with getting back into their studios. And so I know a couple of the student stations have done this. You apart from plugging into the transmitter, you can do most of all of the stuff that you need to do to get people to broadcast in, and have your users listening, and having a sustainer service for when you're not around. You can do all that without having access to any actual audio equipment. And there is a cool tool called AzureCast, which is essentially it's an open source tool. You can install it on a Linux machine. I don't know if it supports Windows as of yet, but if you've got a virtual machine somewhere, or just someone with a fast internet connection at their house with a spare computer, then you can get started and install this AzureCast, and within, I don't know, maybe a couple days, even if you're, you could do it all in one day if you tried hard enough. But I'm sure between now and September that you would be able to start up AzureCast again for free on a virtual machine, and they have great tutorials for installing this stuff. It provides you with the sustainer, with the ability for people to use the other tools like Broadcast using this tool and Radiocast to send IceCast streams in as presenters. And get a show together. And what I would love to say mostly is managing expectations. Just because you don't think you'll be able to match your previous quality of station output, that's not quite the point. It's the fact that you're doing it and you're getting something out and people are going to enjoy it. I guess one last little thing that we did try at UOI is that Skype now has the cool ability for you to output NDI sources as different people. Steve mentioned NDI before, and you can then feed that into OBS, open broadcasting software. And you can effectively make a very fancy looking Skype call with your people on a fancy background with graphics and stuff on a single computer. And we have actually done like visualized TV, radio live productions using that system. And so that's quite cool in that even though or you may have a couple webcams, it's actually in lockdown become easier to make visualized content as a student station because everyone has a webcam, and people are expecting people are probably going to enjoy seeing people actually present their shows live as they would be on the radio. Those are currently my tips on things you can try.
Thank you, Matthew. I think for me, thinking back to my student times, if I was facing this situation now when I was at my student station, I'd be thinking, how can I get in front of my mixer and connect to a transmitter and all that kind of stuff? But it may be that in some cases that actually the student station need to rethink a little bit about how they go about broadcasting. Maybe the focus is the online, and then the FM or the AM is an added bonus. But of course, there's not going to be that many students in the neighbourhood kind of anyway.
Indeed.
Thank you for your tips there. We've just got about just under 10 minutes left, so we're going to try and smash through as many questions as we possibly can. Just a couple for me for starters, and then we'll throw it open to the Q&A. Really quickly, Steve, what do you think was the biggest challenge that you faced in setting up all this broadcasting from home stuff?
So the biggest challenge for us was definitely presenters getting their kit set up at home without us being able to go to them and trying to make that sound good. So we sent out laptops if they needed them and USB mics and stuff, and then a lot of people are not the most technical, so they needed us to talk through on the phone, clear instructions on what are these steps to get this set up, which is why we use things like just USB mic, just a website and a browser that was really easy for them to go to. I see one of the questions is about gain levels and consistency across the board. By using that same USB mic for everyone, and by spending half an hour with each presenter before they actually needed to do anything live, we were able to listen to the quality of the sound and make sure the levels were sort of sounding good. They've all got good mic techniques, so they're talking into like the front of the mic and appropriate distance, and they can tell in their headphones if it sounds right or not. And then where there is a slight difference, the producers and tech ops in our studios are able to kind of adjust for that and account for that on the mixes.
I think also helps if you're using a system like ZTO or pre-records, if you've got a system that does automatic normalization on the way in, that can also help compensate for any inadequacies, if you like, in the levels that are coming in. It doesn't necessarily always have to be about live radio, I think, although obviously that's the buzz, that's where the really, really good stuff is, but needs must, and it's about thinking things slightly differently, I think.
I think the focus needs to be, how can you still do something, even if it's not necessarily what you want? So, you don't need to sound as good as you do in your studio. You don't need to have the best mic at home. I've just had a quick Google. You can get a perfectly appropriate USB mic for about 40-50 quid. If you want something that's going to sound closer to radio quality, you're looking 100-150 quid. But there's so many options available for that.
I was just about to say, as part of what I've done, we've actually produced some documentation for this, so I can share a link for that. If people, it's essentially we've got a list of different budgets, up to about £100, hopefully that'll be useful. Shall I post that?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you, Matthew.
There we go.
Matthew, while you're doing that, see if you can multitask. Got another quick question for you.
Yep.
What do you think is the best bit of advice that you could give to a student station that wants to set up broadcasting from home potentially from September, if they don't have a big engineering or big computing team behind them?
I mean, I've seen this Azuracast, and essentially, if you sign up for like a GitHub account, and you can get a student, it's called a student education thing, and they will give you through that free credit on like Azure and Vultr and other virtual server providers, and through the tutorials, and like some of us, I'm happy to help people through this kind of thing. You can get installed an entire radio in a box. And then with a bit of practice, you just got to figure out how you then connect to it to stream your shows in. But essentially with that, that's a really easy way of getting, without having to, rescue anything and get into the studio to change configuration. You can essentially just change where people listen to you from on the internet. And if you've got a transmitter and you are able to access that, the easiest thing you can do is just open up your new audio stream on that computer and plug it into the headphone socket, and just plug that into the transmitter and get something out on air. It might be delayed, but it's delayed as everyone else, so there's not too much of a difference. And like another really easy thing that those things have, with the fact that they provide a jukebox system, is even if you're not that confident with actually live streaming from home, you could say use the jukebox system. I was just thinking about this. You could pre-record links and things with transitions, with fancy jingles and stuff, and just you can then just like request them as songs to play. And at that point, it will do the song that you asked for, and then we'll play a link that you've pre-recorded, and then we'll play another song. And you can almost, like, depending on how well you can practice and get on doing it, you can effectively make a radio station without being live. You can just pre-record your stuff and do exactly what you guys do, with slightly cheating a bit.
Fab, thanks. I think Rosie's going to be back in a moment, and she'll talk about where you can get more information. And I think there'll be a really short kind of Google Hangout after this, where we can go into a bit more detail and answer some of the questions that we've come from the Q&A. I'm going to ask one more question of both of you, Steve and Matthew. I'll start with Steve. What is the most interesting, surprising, or challenging thing do you think has happened, or that you've learnt through this whole process over the last few months?
That's a tough question.
There's been a lot, though. I think that's the
Yeah.
thing. So nailing it down to one thing.
I've got a fun story in that, like, UOI to transition between shows, as I've said, we use IRN News. At about week 10, our last week of term, the satellite dish just outright decided, nope, I'm not receiving anything anymore. And at that point, we had a problem in that, where do we now find the news? And although we do have a system for downloading the last bulletin, kind of playing it an hour late, that was a bit meh, but you can do that. But what we ended up doing was, we could get the news through a dish at home. We just use CleanFeed to stream it to the studio and just replace the satellite dish, because it was easier than trying to fix it on site, because we had nobody there. Like we just, like, nobody there that could, go up a ladder and whatever. We just moved the dish and streamed it from my house, which works surprisingly effective.
Nice.
I think the best story from our side, saw on social media, Rochelle Humes, who has business on Heart, obviously married to Marvin Humes, posted a little video of him in his little home broadcasting setup, and it's literally a tent he's built on the end of a sofa, made out of a duvet, and I think it was like a washing frame or something, and he sat under that because it was so hot. It was in the week when it was, ridiculous temperature. He was sat there in his boxers presenting live on Capital from his living room.
Nice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to hand over to Rosie now, who can tell us where we need to head next if you want any more info. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a lot of fun hearing all of this stuff. I hope there's been some useful stuff in there so far. And yeah, please keep in touch and let us know if there's anything else you need. Rosie.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. I learned loads. So thanks for sharing that. If anyone wants to carry on with the conversation, I've dropped a link to Table 2 of the coffee shop, which is basically a separate virtual online space where you will be with the other people from this session. Hopefully Steve, Roger and Matthew can jump over there too for a few minutes and answer any further questions, because I know we didn't get through all of them. But yeah, that's the end of the session. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your evenings, everybody.